It is time. It's time to stop hiding. It's time to stand up. It's time for Christians to come together, to share their testimony, to inspire hope, and to join their brothers and sisters as we answer the call. Folks, it is time to wake up the lions.
Hmm.
And we have a lioness with us today, folks. I'm telling you right now, I cannot tell you how thrilled I am that this lady decided to join us today on our podcast, and I can't wait to hear her story. Please welcome former pastor, Christian coach, speaker, and seasoned recovery professional, Annette Chesney, to the show today. Annette, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I am terrific. I'm excited to be here. I was really looking forward to this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everybody I'm sure wants to know, so I'm just going to go ahead and launch in here.
Hmm.
Tell everybody who is Annette Chesney, what are you about, and what brings you here today?
Wow. Okay. So, obviously, I'm a Christian, and you mentioned that I was a former pastor. I pastored for about 15 years between two different churches, and it's been a while since I pastored. And back in 2009, I launched my business as a coaching business, which at the time was focused on leadership and team development, because I had, of course, learned a lot about that in those days of pastoring. I was adult ministries pastor, so basically everything that wasn't kids or worship kind of fell under me. So I had to learn by fire and by John Maxwell reading and just like all kinds of stuff to try to stay ahead of the curve of developing teams. And I got really good at working with people and spotting latent potential that they didn't even recognize within themselves and helping to cultivate that in them and then raise that up into positions of leadership and just coach them. And over time, then they would be leading a ministry area. But one of my areas, well, my two favorite areas, no, three areas that I just love, and they all tie together really, was discipleship and recovery issues and small groups. And they really tie together well. I mean, I see the recovery and healing process. To me, that's a form of discipleship, discipling,
Yeah.
because I mean, that's Isaiah 61, he talks about how he came for the brokenhearted and to set captives free and, you know, the oil of joy instead of the mourning and, all that kind of stuff. And with the goal in verse 3 there that will become oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. So that's really my calling and my mission. It's just taken different forms at different times.
That's
Yeah.
that's absolutely beautiful. I love what you're doing. If you don't mind me asking,
Hmm.
former pastor,
Yeah.
did you just leave to do your own thing? Is that what happened?
Um, no, no. Was a little uncomfortable, but at the time, the church, the second church that I was with, a lot of dysfunction behind the scenes that I tried really, really hard to bring resolution to and to work through. And as time went on, I started seeing things that started making me really uncomfortable. And the senior pastor came to me. I had a support group ministry going on, and people were coming to the Lord. People were coming in from the community. It was a terrific community outreach. And they were coming into the church. It was just like a side door into the church because people thought, wow, if this is what church is like, oh my gosh, I've been so changed. And, well, I want to be a part of a church that's like that. And he came to me and said, eh, you know, I just don't think this really fits in. I want you to shut it down. And I said, well, what about this doesn't fit in? This is the heart of Christ. And he was, gosh, not to be mean or anything, but he was kind of superficial,
Hmm.
and I was into like deep transformation and he was into appearances. So I don't really know what the issue was if he just thought, the assumption is recovery said, well, I don't want a bunch of addicts in here. Well, the recovery applies to all of us. you know, Everyone. We're in a fallen world and we're fallen people. So there's stuff. We've all got things to deal with and we all need to learn how to handle our hearts well. And so I cried for a weekend. went back home or went back to the office on Monday and gave my resignation. That
Good
was
for you.
so hard. That was so hard. And I felt like a fish out of water for a long, long time. And in the midst of that, I started going through a lot of personal trauma drama and not realizing at the time I was dealing with a narcissist.
Hmm.
And there had been a couple other narcissists after that, prior to that. Not to say there's a narcissist under every bush, because there's not, you know. And I'm very clear of the distinctions between someone who just might be dysfunctional or just have like some jerk-like qualities versus someone who could be diagnosable as a narcissist. And it's way more prevalent than you think. And I even saw a researcher that said narcissism is really at an epidemic level, they called it. And I don't know,
Wow.
I just have some theories about it. I kind of think like as darkness has risen in the world, I think that kind of goes along with it
Sure.
because, who's the original narcissist, right? The original. And he likes to
100%.
counterfeit. Yeah, he likes to counterfeit God in things. So God wants to raise up a people after his image. And so the counterfeiter, who comes as an angel of light, makes sense to me that he'd want to raise up a people in his image too.
Yeah.
So it's sad because they're actually really empty on the inside, So you see a lot of these behaviors and stuff that just come from that emptiness. Um, Not to get ahead of myself, but I developed something that I call the Narcissistic Relationship Spectrum.
Hmm.
And it's just from all the different ones that I came to recognize that were in my life that I was like, oh, well, that explains some things. And all the ones, the women that I was working with at the time before, like I was working with women on these issues for a couple of years before I finally said, and at the prodding of a coach I was working with, why don't you just go all in on this? I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. There's a lot of baggage there. There's a lot of spiritual warfare that's going on, behind all that. And, just getting to the place where, wow, I had some peace and healing in my life from like years and years of trauma. And I was like, do I really want to go stand on that front line again? So I pushed against the bricks for a while and he kept challenging me and I finally went, okay. He said, look, for 2 years, just go all in on it for 2 years and see what happens. So I did. And game changing. And I've been really amazed at so many people out there who have dealt with this in one form or another, men and women. And I've worked with both on these issues. All my programs and stuff I do are geared for women. So when I have a man that comes along, and truly, I feel like the men who've experienced narcissistic abuse, they're definitely an underserved population, especially Christian men with this.
Yeah.
So those guys I just work with privately, one on one, and the women I've got, my coaching groups and a membership and everything that I put them in. But um, and I mentioned about when darkness rises in the world, the
Hmm.
flip side of that is the more darkness arises, the more God arises in the midst of that too, right? And
Yeah,
he
absolutely.
promises us in his word that he works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And I'm living proof of that.
This whole topic is very near and dear to you, I can tell.
Yes, yes,
And it sounds like you've been through a lot of these things personally.
I have. I have. And for a while, I looked back when I started putting two and two together, and this was after I stopped pastoring, and I was looking back and I started realizing this. And then I went through a pity party for a little while, saying, Lord, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have good people in my life? Why has there never been a man who loved me? Woe is me, Lord. Let me sit in the ditch and eat dirt. That's kind of the way I felt for a while. But then the Lord kind of turned my perspective around. And as I got a little further down the road with that, I realized that this was a calling for me. So everything else I had done in my life, the support group ministry, discipling, small group, all that kind of stuff, all the training I had. We had a counseling center with the church too. And, just all that stuff. And then my own experience in the workplace, male, female, whatever, um, it equipped me. And, we know from the story, of Joseph and everything, all the stuff that he went through, it actually equipped him and prepared him for what was to come, which was something pretty heavy duty, in terms of the impact that he was able to make. And I just kind of feel like, little old me in my life, who am I? But God's done something similar with that he's equipped me through all this. So I've come far enough down the road that I can look back over all that and laugh at the pity party that I was in. And really, it's kind of laughing at the enemy who tried to destroy, but instead equipped me. So now I can go out and equip others, teach them how to heal their heart, how to house clean, how to get their identity back and become their best self ever. And then to go from, even beyond that, to be future focused in terms of instead of having sort of a lackluster life that we're just kind of going through the motions and just doing the best we can, instead have a really powerful life where everything you've been through, God knits it all together too. And now you have this incredible place of kingdom impact that's possible for you that wouldn't have been had you not been through all that stuff. So, we get the last laugh.
I love that. I mean, I love that entire outlook.
Hmm.
I wish that everybody could find a level of peace where they could
Yes.
feel that. That's really amazing. And I'm also guessing that didn't happen overnight. That
No,
sounds
it
like it
did
took a
not.
little while.
It took a while. It did. It did. God and I sat in my little prayer closet and had a lot of cry sessions and a lot of like, I don't get it, God, why? But, again, I can laugh at it now looking back, but at the same time, I know when I see people in that place, I just want to hug them and say, I get it. I get it. But there's your best is yet to come, I promise you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now you call yourself a seasoned recovery professional.
Hmm.
And so that means that you've been doing this for a while, of course.
Yeah.
Um, what sort, you mentioned earlier, recovery can be all sorts of things, especially when,
Hmm.
that wonderful person decided they didn't want to treat addicts or anything.
Hmm.
God forbid, pun intended. But you mentioned that recovery covers a large area.
It is.
And so for you, in what you do, what does recovery really mean?
Yeah. So nowadays, I really dial into narcissistic abuse recovery,
Okay.
you know,
Mm.
and for Christian women, or at least those who are open to the things of the Lord, because I incorporate scripture in everything that I do and teach them how to actually go deeper in their walk with the Lord as part of the process and a new lifestyle for them. So it's kind of a holistic picture. But yeah, we deal with the heartaches, we deal with the lies that we believe, we deal with agreements we've come into with the enemy. As we're forward thinking, we look at the authority that we actually have, what the cross really did for us, what's available for us through him, all that sort of thing, because my goal is truly yes, we do the healing and everything, and they come to a place of peace and, they rebuild their life and everything. But it's more than that. This isn't just about, I'm so glad you're feeling better. Have a good life. This is more like, I'm so glad you're feeling better. So now, what's your place in the kingdom?
Mm.
What's the call on you? How does God want to use you? I call it your kingdom zone of impact, you know. So it's the part where whoever that person is, they realize, wow, God and I really do get the last laugh here because I can now speak deeply into issues and I've overcome so much that I'm just a living, breathing testimonial of what's possible. Not in
Nice.
spite of, but because of what I've been through.
Very nice. Very nice. In terms of the work that you do, I did some research on you too. I know you did a little bit
Uh-huh.
on me, and I love that. You made there's a couple of quotes that I found that were yours, and they hit me. They hit me kind of hard, just with some of the things I've been through, and I wanted to just ask you about
Mm,
them. The first one, which I really liked, was you have to somehow transition from what's wrong with me to what happened to me.
mhm.
Can you expound on that just a little bit for the folks, let them know kind of what you mean by it, how it applies, and so on. I really liked that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of when it comes to narcissistic abuse, part of the MO of the way a narcissist operates is to tear you apart. They want to destroy your identity, and somehow everything gets flipped onto you that it's always your fault. Now, that's not to say that, we're completely blameless and things, 'cause we all have our
Mhm.
stuff that we need to work on. But I see women, and of course men, but I see these women come away from that relationship really feeling beaten down, and they think that there's something wrong with them. They didn't pray hard enough for the relationship to work. Maybe I should have fasted more. Maybe I really am a loser. Maybe I really don't know what I'm talking about. Now you see all this in business women. You see imposter syndrome kicking in, and they start shrinking back from opportunities, and it just has these huge ramifications throughout their life. So coming to terms with what narcissistic abuse is and how they operate. And again, on my spectrum, this just came out of my experience individually, as well as working with women and 2, 3 years of research. And then a download from God to organize all that, where I realized, narcissistic behavior, you can kind of view it as a spectrum.
Mhm.
Now, if you look at the DSM-5, which is, I believe, the latest like diagnostics and statistics manual is called, um, you don't see like they have certain qualities that, and it's like a nine characteristics, and they have to have like, I don't know, is it? I can't remember off the top of my head, like 7 out of 9 or 6 out of 9 or something of those characteristics that they could be actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
And you look at that, and I think that that is a grossly inadequate definition of it. So I realize that there's a spectrum on it. So, and I've got like 4 categories, and I'm here in Florida, and as a matter of fact, I see we got a storm rolling in, like the sky's turning black out there. So hopefully everything's cool with our connection as we go here. But um, so I've got like 4 categories, and you can think of it just like a hurricane, where you've got like the higher the number of the category, the more destructive it is. So same kind of thing here on this spectrum. So on the low end, we've got category 1, and that's us regular people. We do the best we can. We are very imperfect. Um, we can be hurtful, we can be insensitive, we can be a jerk, but we don't really mean it. And when we become aware that we've really hurt somebody that we care about, we feel bad and we want to make it right. And we self-reflect to try to do better. You know,
Hmm.
we'll take ownership of the things. And sometimes, sometimes our pride gets in there. We're mad, and there's always arrogance that comes with our anger. But once we kind of settle from that and humble up a little bit, then we realize, oh yeah, I need to work on that, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a
Hmm.
category 1. It's just like
Okay.
the fallen nature, right? Especially if it's unredeemed.
Sure.
But then you cross the line over into category 2, and that's an important line because things have changed. A category 2 narcissist, they're very empty inside. They're fear-based in all they do. It is all about appearances. And sometimes they do act arrogant, but it's really insecurity that's there. They need to have constant attention, constant validation, coming from the outside. And they have to have someone there all the time. And they'll get really angry and even rage if you're not giving them what they need to feel okay. Now, with the category 2, they're not necessarily the ones who lay awake in bed at night figuring out how to destroy you. They hurt you, but a lot of it is like reactive type behavior. You're dealing with like an emotional child who's tantruming. That's kind of a category two. And the thing is, it's not something that changes. And I learned this the hard way a couple of times because I've got enough of a skill set that I can, you know, deal with somebody and be able to hold up a mirror for them to see some things. I remember one relationship I was in that was happening. I was getting blamed for everything, and it was just like there was no resolution, and it was just to the point of ridiculousness. And I just kind of went, "Hey, time out." And I used my skill set to hold up the mirror, and he stopped, and for just a moment, it's like the veneer was cracked, and he did look in the mirror, and he absolutely fell apart. It just went from one end to the other. He fell apart and he was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a monster. Just get away from me. Get away from me." And he just disappeared into another room. And I kind of sat there on the couch for a little bit. And for about 15, 20 minutes, I was like, "Okay." And I went looking for him and he was face down in the closet. And it was so bizarre. And I went in there and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, just get away. That's all I do is hurt people. And I went, okay, well, let's talk about this here. He just had this extreme reaction.
Wow.
And then it was a boomerang effect, like a rubber band that you stretch and it snaps back because he couldn't stand there and look at himself. He saw himself as completely bad at that point. He wasn't completely bad, but then the rubber band snapped back and then he went on the attack to me, because it was too painful for him to self-examine. So instead, he just had to lash out and he had to make it all me, and I was the problem, shoot the messenger kind
Right.
of thing. So that's a category two. They're just kind of an emotional child. And you cross another line when you go up to a category three, and this is where it starts getting dark, like really dark, because a category three is more, how can I put this? They've crossed some sort of dark point within their own heart and mind to where they know they're hurting you and they want to. It's
Nice.
not an accident. Yeah, they want to. They enjoy it. It makes them feel superior. It makes them feel powerful when they can control your emotions. If you're having a good day, if they can destroy it, if they can get you to cry, if they can get you to feel that that success you just had on the job was a fluke, you didn't really deserve it. They're just looking to suck the life out of you. And on the spectrum, I go into more than that, and I have like 10 different types, that I've named them, in each of the categories. And then the next one, and when you cross that category three line into a category four, this is now like sociopath, psychopathville.
Wow.
And it's very dangerous, and there's criminal behavior and everything that's there. So a category two, if you're working on you and your identity is pretty solid, you're working with a coach, you've got a support system around you. If you're married to a category two and you just don't feel like, you know, you're released to leave, you've no known adultery or things that are going on, although that it's extremely common when you're dealing with a narcissist
Mm.
that they cheat, and they do drugs and just different addictive behaviors in one form or another because they're empty on the
Right.
inside. So they're just trying to like fill the void. And but a category two with the right kind of training and help and support, it's manageable. It's not going to be fun to be married to that. There's grieving that comes along with it because the relationship, outside of a true miracle from God, the relationship will never be what you feel like it could or should be. It'll never really feel like a partnership.
Yeah.
You always feel like you're parenting your spouse, which is not cool,
No.
you know. But a three or a four, yeah,
Can't come back
that's
from that, huh?
no, not
Mm.
really.
Wow.
Yeah. hmm
And this is from the DSM-5?
No, that's from my spectrum.
That's from your spectrum. That's right.
Yeah.
And you
Mhm.
created this spectrum then. This is
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. I like it. I like it. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Um, I mean, goodness, you've done a lot. This is your area of expertise at this point.
It is. Yeah. Not that I ever saw that coming or wanted it, but here I am. So
Stepping into your calling.
that's right. That's right.
Nice. As long as we're talking about this, why don't we take it all the way across the finish line?
Hmm.
What do you offer to folks to help them? Groups or programs or anything else. Let's just make
Yeah.
sure we get
Yeah.
that in right now. What other things do you offer to help folks who are dealing with this sort of thing?
Yeah. I've got a bunch of things going on. On the complementary side of things, I have the spectrum I was just talking about. I have the spectrum available for download. And I'm actually just updating recently. I have a masterclass, an on-demand masterclass, where I go through and teach that spectrum and break down like the 10 different types. Besides just the spectrum, I have another chart that goes with it that goes through the 10 different types of narcissists. Again, my labels that I've put on it. Um, and and then there's 5 different dimensions of life, and I give safety rankings. If you're dealing with someone that you recognize that they're on that spectrum, like you recognize those characteristics, and
Yeah.
it's been long standing, they're not just having a bad day, they're not just in a rough season of life. Like this has been going on. This is the way they are. And so I've got that. I have a devotional that I put out. It comes out once a week, just comes through the email, and that's called Glass Slipper Reflections because everything's geared around the Cinderella No More theme. And with Glass Slipper Reflections, I don't do fluff. You know, it's encouraging, but each one of those devotionals addresses a specific issue that helps you examine your own heart and what is the heart of God in this and where we're at and what can we do about some of these things. So it's just kind of a bite-sized nugget, each of these devotionals. Um, I have a membership, and that is a paid membership, and it's called the Cinderella No More Academy. And in the academy, I have the Cinderella No More program, which is training. I do a couple of live workshops a week for just
Oh,
coaching, and I teach a process, the heart healing process, I called it. And there's like 7 steps in that. And so each week, in addition to the live, coaching workshop that I do guided heart healing, which is kind of like a co-working session. And during that time, I just walk that, like I prompt people and we walked through each step of that healing process. And, you have a particular issue that you feel the Lord has said, hey, this is the one I want you to look at this week. And we just kind of work through that together. Right on there, I set some music and have a timer. And, we all just kind of like journal at certain points or look at certain things or have prayer in a particular direction during that time. So that's my academy, Cinderella No More Academy. And did I mention about the whole Cinderella No More thing? I don't know if I did. Oh, you're muted.
hey, there we go. I don't think
Yeah.
that we talked about that on the air. So I was like,
Right.
going to go back to it. I was all set to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, if you want to explain kind of where that reference comes from. Absolutely.
Yes, yes. It was one of those things that God just like abruptly did this download one day and gave me the name, themed around Cinderella. Because in the Cinderella story, we're all familiar with, like the Disney version of
Oh,
of
yeah.
Cinderella, and everyone assumes that Cinderella is her name, but it's really not. In the actual story, her name was Ella. That's her true name. But if we look at this from a narcissistic frame of reference, well, the stepmother and the stepsisters pretty much qualify as narcissists. And they're the ones that started calling her Cinderella. Cinders, like from the fireplace, ashes and soot, dirty. You're nothing, just get on your hands and knees and clean out the soot and do the laundry and do this kind of stuff. So it attacked her identity to call her Cinderella. You know, it,
Nice.
it was demeaning to her,
Yeah.
to kind of put her beneath them in every way. So her real name was Ella. So Cinderella No More is the basis of everything that I do. It's themed around that. And by the way, there is in that story, there is a kingdom and there is a prince, so that's God's kingdom and Jesus. And, so kind of ties in nicely.
It sure does. And that's kind of a big thing to leave out of the story when you find that out later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I understand. We're not going to start questioning Disney and how that works. Not
Hmm. Hmm.
not today. Um,
Yeah. There's
so,
there's a whole story there.
oh my goodness. All
Yeah.
right. I love what you're doing. Where do people find this? And we'll come back to it and it'll be in the show notes. But since we're talking
Yeah.
about it, just to put kind of a fine point on it, where do they find you? Where do they find this?
So the spectrum that we just talked about, that's a real popular download I have. It's free. And if you just go to AnnetteChesney.com/spectrum,
Got it.
and you can get that and download that. And probably the best place to go is to my website, which is AnnetteChesney.com. And you can always reach out to me, Annette@AnnetteChesney.com. Shoot me an email. I'd love to hear stories,
Perfect.
because I get it. We can chat a little bit.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Hmm.
I have both those links, so we are in good shape. Those will be in the show notes, folks. But I just wanted to make sure while we were talking
Hmm.
about that, we got it.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me, moving this a little bit,
Hmm.
we had talked about how um, uh, people who are, in fact, narcissists are sort of being pushed that direction by greater forces than you and I.
Hmm. Hmm.
We talked a little bit about spiritual warfare and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And, I have found that in my daily dealings and all the things that I do, I've seen it. I understand how it works. I try very hard when I encounter people like that to give them a little bit of grace right off the bat because I know that as much as I'm being pushed the direction I'm going,
Hmm.
they're being pushed the direction they're going. And
Right.
so I try to, put a little of that out there. But um, when you apply that, then all of this narcissistic behavior, all of the spectrum and everything that you're working on, everything you're putting together is in fact spiritual warfare of some kind. Am I
Yeah,
getting that right?
you are. I would take it so far to actually say we're dealing with occultic witchcraft type spirits that are there,
Wow.
you know, Jezebel type stuff, the manipulation, the love bombing that narcissists do, like the whole gamut of that. Um, the way they present themselves when they're really not. It's just, and the higher up the spectrum they are, the more in league the flesh is with the demonic aspect of things.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely out there.
And so your coaching is faith based in order to
Absolutely.
counteract that, of course.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Question. And you always have the right to not answer a question or tell me to go jump in a lake. But
Hmm.
I get really into, what my guests are talking about. And, if everything is faith based, I know you mentioned earlier that, you work with Christian women. They don't have to necessarily be Christian, but it's Christian women, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how you do it. How do folks who don't come to the training with a Christian base or who don't come in, with that mindset, how do you sort of bridge that gap between folks who are not Christian, but it's such a faith-based training and the belief behind where the narcissism is coming from is
Yeah.
what it is? How do you bridge that gap to connect to those folks and help them?
Great question. They need to at least be open to the things of God, you know? And a lot of times when we're hurting, when we've been crushed and broken, that is the moment for a lot of people when they do come to the Lord.
Good point.
Unfortunately, it
Yeah.
takes something like that in our lives to do that. So if they're at least open to these things, and they want to learn, they want to grow, they want healing. I'll bend over backwards to work with people like that. But I made a decision a long time ago that I'm very upfront with my frame of reference. And because I do include scripture in this and we do look at it from a biblical standpoint, I don't ever want someone to think, I've pulled a bait and switch on them. It's not. But
Right.
um, and if they feel like they're just not ready for certain things, that's okay. I mean, they could pick what they want, but as long as they keep moving forward, eventually that path leads to the Lord. So.
Nice.
Mhm.
Excellent answer. Love that. Absolutely love that.
Mhm.
Um, Again, you always have the right to not answer the question, but
Mhm.
I'm intrigued by the answer you got from, the pastor, about the
Mhm.
addicts. Ever since I heard you say that, that's just gnawing at me a little bit,
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
feel like that was somehow mounted in spiritual warfare, regardless of
Oh
where
yeah.
it came from?
Oh yeah. Looking back on that, knowing what I know now, um, not saying he's a narcissist, but there was a lot of insecurities and dysfunctions and stuff in his life that he did not address.
Yeah.
And so he was glazing over. So again, this is all speculation on my part,
Sure.
but just
Well, we're
sort of
not
like,
naming names or anything either. We're just,
yeah, this is
yeah,
just like educated opinion
right.
with it, and I think maybe some of that was a bit threatening to him because he wasn't at that point willing to look at issues in his own life,
Right.
you know? So, and if you're not willing to do that, then, you'll kind of demonize, we could say other things that feel uncomfortable to you, that
Hmm.
feel a little convicting, so that's, he was just wanting to shut down that whole support group ministry and everything.
That's so
Yeah.
crazy. I
Yeah.
thank you for answering that question. I appreciate it. I'm sure the
Hmm.
listeners do too. And no one's accusing anybody of anything. We're just having a
Right. Right.
conversation and, sort of supposing, that type of thing.
Hmm.
But, you know, given where narcissistic behavior comes from, given the way evil comes at you,
Yes.
even when it's someone like that,
Hmm.
uh, the seven deadly sins are, there for everybody. And
Right.
pride is a
Right.
great way to get in the door. And
Absolutely.
that's where that comes from when you're, threatened. It's because you are suffering from too much pride and you can't accept
Yep.
somebody else is helping you out. So,
Yep.
doesn't surprise me at all, really, to hear that. But thank you for
Hmm.
addressing that piece of it.
Sure.
Another thing that we talk about here, and you mentioned it also, is discipleship. And I know that that's
Hmm.
really important to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone you're helping is a form of discipleship, bringing them
Hmm.
closer, faith-based program, so on and so forth.
Right. Right.
What else? Maybe you can expand on that. What discipleship means to you in your life, how you're pursuing it, the whole gamut.
Yeah. I think the bottom line is just growing more and more in Christ likeness, you know, and that's a process, that's a lifestyle and something we have to pursue because, we won't be perfected in that, of course, until we see him face to face, right? So in the meantime, I mean, doesn't the word tell us, we're with fear and trembling, we're supposed to continue to work these things out
Yeah.
in our life. And, you mentioned spiritual warfare. It's just kind of interesting because um, there is a lot of spiritual warfare, as I mentioned, that goes on with this. And sometimes I get really weary of it, to tell you the truth, because, like I'm on the front line working with people and I just kind of get slammed every once in a while. And I've gotten faster and faster at recognizing it because a direct frontal assault now I recognize it and I can deal with it. But it's when the fog rolls in, the sly ways, it kind of creeps in and
Yeah.
starts sucking the life out of you. And that's when, takes me a few days. I'm like, wait a minute. I've been through this before, but a point that I want to make, I think is really important, is for people, if you just like stand up, well, I got authority in Christ, and if that's what it is I'm dealing with, I'm just going to stand up and come against it. And you are likely to get kicked in the teeth doing that. Because for one thing, yeah, we've got the armor of God, we've got the sword of the spirit, right?
Mhm.
A sword doesn't do much good for you if you don't know how to wield it, for one thing. You can hold a sword in your hand all day long. If you don't know how to use it and you're skilled at it, then, in a battle, you're going to be down for the count. So, um, I always teach people that they have to work on themselves because you have to do your own house cleaning. Any place where the enemy's got an entry point in us, traumas, um, the way we speak, that we speak word curses over ourselves, we come into agreement with lies, we do all kinds of stuff that we need to address ourselves. And I don't care if there's narcissistic abuse or not. If you're in a leadership capacity in any way, we have a responsibility before the Lord. It's just like it says in the word about, teachers, there's a higher level of responsibility. So if you're leading in one way or another, you're teaching or coaching or whatever it is, that you have a responsibility before the Lord. You're held to a higher standard, not just, it's not about, well, I'm just going to try to do everything perfectly,
Right.
but it's more about the integrity of your walk. And when you realize, yeah, I messed that up, or no, I had the wrong attitude about that, do we deal with that openly and honestly? Do we come humbly before the Lord? Do we take away any ground that the enemy could leverage? Because if we're going to start coming at him in spiritual warfare, because we do have authority, but when we start coming at him, he knows all the chinks in the armor,
Mhm.
and he will go after those things and leverage it and amplify it and cause all kinds of problems. And so we can be ill-equipped. So the first step is that we work on our own hearts and minds and deal with that. And then as we progressively get better, then we're able to stand better in that same way. And by that same token, I say all this because I see a lot of people, if they're married to a narcissist, they just think, well, I can just pray them into the kingdom. Well, I can just pray this demon off of them. I can just, and the thing is, even if you did, if that person has not made themselves right before God, that thing's just going to come back and then some, right? And the thing with narcissists, part of that is, it's such a pride-based thing. And that's the opposite of humility before the Lord. You can't come to the Lord unless you've humbled yourself
Right.
and you've acknowledged that you need a savior, right? And that's exactly what a narcissist doesn't, except when they're play acting in the church, because they do a lot of that stage performance kind of stuff. It's not really real, and the people who are behind closed doors with them feel the brunt of that, no matter how charming or, how many Bible passages they've memorized, they're not living it.
Right.
And also, everyone has a free will, so you're not going to pray over someone's free will. I mean, God gave that to each of us for better or for worse, because if he didn't, we'd just be robots. How do we really love him if we're just a robot? He wants us to come to him. And so, what I do recommend is pray that the Lord would orchestrate circumstances around the narcissist such. Um, I get this from Hosea chapter 2. If you know the story of Hosea and Gomer. Gomer, the wife, Hosea was the prophet. And the Lord commanded him to go take a wife who was basically a, prostitute. And that was, a lot of the prophets,
Mm.
Old Testament times, there was a lot of um, theatrics in terms of like they would act out certain messages or different things, and so God had him marry this prostitute because that represented Israel and how Israel had been unfaithful to him and everything. So he's like illustrating this, like poor Hosea, you know, that he had to go through this. But in chapter 2, it talks about how, his wife went astray because of course she hadn't changed. And so God says that he will put her in the desert. So basically, he strips away, says all her other lovers, all the things, and he puts her in the desert. And then he says, and there I will allure her and call her back to me. So that's where I say, if you want to pray for the narcissist, pray that they'll wind up in a desert and all their tactics and all their false comforters and everything else are stripped away from them in the hopes that they would come to the end of themselves and fall on their face and say, actually, I need help. I can't keep living this way. Now, in the practical reality, I wouldn't say that never happens, but it's a slim possibility, you know, which is sad. It's tragic. Doesn't have to be that way,
Right.
but yeah,
You said it earlier, though. Very often people have to lose everything in
yeah,
order to open up to
hmm,
what they've been denying and pushing away.
yeah,
And I mean that is that story. Literally lose everything,
yeah.
and
It's
and
sad
then
that we're
maybe
like that.
yeah. As a bunch, humans, we got a lot of work to
Yeah, yeah, we do. It's that
do.
whole,
So,
fall in the garden thing that went down.
if only. What are you gonna do, right?
Yeah,
But I love everything that you have said today, and I'm thoroughly impressed. First of all, with everything that you've done. I mean, you are clearly an expert on all of this. But
mm,
I've often sort of, I don't know if I want to say suspected, but maybe felt a connection between the narcissism epidemic that's sort of all over the country now
yeah.
and spiritual warfare. Um, Something coming from evil, that type of thing.
Hmm.
I never ever could have connected it though. And then as
Mm,
soon as I started talking with you today, and you started making a couple of those comments and points, it was like, honestly, it just cleared my mind on the whole
yeah,
topic. And now I'm like,
right.
how did I not see that way?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It
Um,
creeps in around the edges,
oh
and
yeah,
it gets normalized.
it's insane,
Hmm.
but enlightening.
Hmm.
I love that. Thank you for that today.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
don't get to leave every episode and go, man, I really had an enlightening moment, but that was huge
Hey, that's awesome. Praise
for
God.
me today. So,
Yeah.
I just, when I have those, I just want to make sure I point it out because hopefully somebody else out there is having it
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
But all right, we're gonna do a little something different, just because we've covered so much,
Hmm.
and you bring so much to the table. To be honest with you, as we kind of look to wrap this up time wise, I want to give you the floor for a minute, and I
Hmm.
want to just say, hey, is there anything I didn't ask you that you feel is really pertinent to your message that you want to get out? Anything maybe that we did talk about and you want to double down on, make sure you make a good point with, or even just a parting thought, something that you want to leave
Hmm.
with, the
Hmm.
folks that are listening. And I just want to just give you the floor. Go ahead and go wherever you need to go with it, and go for it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to give hope, you know. If someone's out there, they're listening, they've been through this stuff, male or female, either way, and I feel even more for the guys sometimes because they are such an underserved population and they don't want to admit that there's been some, maybe some other guy or some woman in their life that has just beaten them down. It's like they feel like if I admit this, I lose my man card, I lose points or something. But, whoever you are, man, woman, I get it. It hurts. It hurts beyond what you thought was possible to hurt. But this is not the end. As a matter of fact, what Satan intended for evil, God can use for good. As I've mentioned before, truly your best is yet to come. Because this is one of those things that what could God make possible as a result of you having gone through this? I mean, when you're following the Lord, there are always silver linings. He knits everything together for good. We can't see it, it doesn't feel like it, but He always does. And just pressing into Him and continuing to move forward. Get some help. If you're dealing with that, get some help. You don't have to try to figure this out yourself, trial and error, because sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees, and we do need to have, objective help with it, but it is worth it because the enemy would like nothing more than to keep you under his boot in sort of a survival mode for years to come. And I've talked with people who've spent, a decade or more of their life in that position, and then we work together for a while and it's like all of a sudden they start coming to life again and they start getting excited about the future. Their energy and enthusiasm comes back, a sense of passion and joy. So much is possible. It's not too late. You're not too old. You're not disqualified. It's all part of your testimony, and God will use it all for good.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for making me look so good by giving you the floor to round us out. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, sure.
Okay. Former pastor, Christian coach, speaker, seasoned recovery professional, and absolute expert on everything that you're talking about today. Uh, Goodness, Annette Chesney, thank you so much for being here, for spreading the word the way you have, and for just sharing all of this knowledge with everybody. It's been amazing to have you on today.
Oh, well, I'm truly grateful. It's been an honor.
Thank you so
Appreciate the
much.
opportunity.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Hmm.
Folks, I've said it before. It's time. It's time to wake up
Hmm.
the lions. More
Yep.
than that, it's time for you to take your rightful place with your brothers and your sisters and let them hear you roar. Folks,
Yeah.
the world's ready. You're ready. You just have to believe it.